I'll do the same.
Star
Turn your phone down. That might be a novel concept.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order.
Dan has taken Elaine Holtz home, and when he
Please
came
take
back,
your seats. We're about to get started here. Welcome, everyone, to the City Council study session. Our first agenda item of the evening is CRM Overview. My understanding is our staff source will be Communications Director Allison Carney. Good evening.
Good evening. I will be very brief. The point of tonight is just to show you what we have launched to the public, and it's our new CRM, and the point of this is to really be able to provide high-quality, fast 24-hour responses to residents. So I'm just going to walk you through it. It's helpful probably if you have any issues you ever want to submit, but also for you to start spreading the word to your constituents as well. So if they come to our website, we have a new page for the Inglewood CO, which is also an app. So you can submit right here from our website, or you can download the app on your mobile device. So I'll just show you how easy and intuitive it is. So this is just if I was somebody from the public, I would come in here, put in my email and create a password, and then and then you can select where you are. So we'll say we're here. And then there's a list of service types. So we'll say code enforcement, graffiti on city property. And then you can type in whatever your issue is. You can also upload, if you have photos, you can upload pictures of it, which could also be really helpful. And then you submit your request. And then you also will get an email to the email that you logged in with saying that your request has been submitted. And then I will show you from staff side when they log in, they'll see this. So if I'm working at a front desk and I receive a call from somebody who doesn't have a computer, they're not at a computer, but they want to tell me about the graffiti, I can type it in right here, same thing, save, and that will be routed to the proper staff. Staff comes in here. I don't have any requests. I like that. Here's all of the ones. Here's all the ones out there right now. You can also see them by map, which is kind of interesting. Here's a list of all the closed items, and this is really new too. We did a soft launch earlier in June, and then we're just rolling it out right now. So there's not a ton yet, but this is. I'll go back to the list. So these are all the closed ones. The one thing I would like to point out is that this is not for open records requests. That needs to be done in writing, and that information, if they do select that from the drop down, it tells them what they need to do for that. So this is not an answer for that. This is just service requests and issues. And then the neat thing for us is all of these different types of reports that we can run by monthly request types, or how many cases are closed that month, or month to month, or even once we get more information, year to year comparisons. So if council would ever wants to see what is the most common type of complaints that we get, or how many have we closed in the past 2 months, we can easily gather that in one of these reports. So the only other thing that's kind of interesting is if people want to download the app. And then we have this little tutorial. Oops, do we have volume, Sam? Can you do it? I don't know. Well, it's just really fun, catchy music.
Maybe there's there's no volume either on the video.
So
It is a very helpful video. I'm
Yeah,
not even sure. There's a voiceover, I think, element as well. But it is fairly intuitive once you're
It is
in the
intuitive,
app.
yeah.
Had a chance to review the video.
So I do want to stress you don't need the app. You can do it from our webpage as well. It's the same functionality. But if the nice thing of probably having the app is if you're on your phone and you snap a picture right there where you are, it'd be easy to submit right through the app.
Is the routing of the issues the same as in the app as the online version?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So it would go to the same department. And the departments also have the option if they feel like maybe code enforcement gets it, but community development could help out, they can reroute it to the proper department if it's not set up properly. But
Another question is, does it only take physical street addresses? Can you just drop that little arrow onto where you kind of think it is, or do you have to know the physical address?
no, I think if you just put the pin on the map, I think that's good. And I haven't tried doing it that way, but that was the intent that
Yeah, okay.
the city.
Want to make sure we've got kind of that functionality, or if they could identify it by, the name
Cross
of the
streets, at
or
least.
Inglewood City Center or the Gothic Theater or something like that. Perhaps it could get them close and they could move that little pin. But
Yeah.
I guess I want to make sure it's got that functionality because not everybody knows the addresses of every place.
Right,
And it's kind of
yeah.
difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments while we're working on trying to get the video to play?
Obviously, it's for non-emergency sort of stuff.
Right.
Still dial 911, yes. Other questions or comments?
And we do have, I didn't show you this, but on that same webpage, if you don't submit a request, you can also look through the knowledge, you can search the knowledge database, which might answer your question or at least tell you some facts around the issue, which can be helpful. That's fine. It's just music.
That's a really neat tool.
All right, excellent. Anything else on this issue? Okay, thank you. Appreciate the presentation. We'll move on to agenda item 2. This is the fire code amendments. Our fire marshal, Laura Herblan, is here to discuss the 2015 International Fire Code adoption. Good evening.
Hello again. So I was here back in April, also in May. So I'm here this evening just to field any other questions that you may have about the 2015 code as presented in multiple versions. And that's kind of why I'm here this evening, to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. So I guess we'll jump into questions or comments from council. Mayor Pro Tem?
I guess I was expecting more of a presentation from you. I think we've talked, some of us on the council, about we don't have an issue with 2015, but it's the amendments. And one of the things we had been asking is which amendments really matter to the city of Inglewood. I know that for a lot of us, we don't want to be an over-regulated city, but at the same time, we don't want to do anything that could be deemed as unsafe or and plan for that. But so there's 770 pages here, and I'm not sure which ones you really wanted us to pay attention to. Could you kind of go over what your goal for this was?
Absolutely. When I presented, the 2015 code, just an overview, is presented with cutoffs for 3 years in advance. So 2012 was when the first, the cutoff date was for recommendations into the 2015 code, and that always happens in 3-year cycle. So looking at the 2015 code is the technology based off of 2012 at the very latest. So when I spent the last 2.5 to 3 years looking at the 2015 code, I evaluated where we were in construction, lessons learned in the fire service, emergency services, and also a combination of the 2 years that Denver Fire has been providing emergency services for the city of Inglewood. So In totality with that and meeting with the building department and community development, the package that I presented in April was the amendments that I felt were the best for the city of Inglewood, construction, emergency responders, everything in general. So that was the package that I support fully, professionally backed. Since that time, the second meeting I came in on May 8th, the chief building official Montanez had reevaluated a few of the chapters that she thought might be in conflict with the building code. So we met again and collaboratively discussed some of those issues that she had with Chapter 9 and 10, and have since, come to concessions and agreed to take out a lot of those chapters, and that's what I represented to you in version 2, was in my 700 pages of executive summary. Thought it might be easier for you to see visually which ones that we removed, and I highlighted those in red to try to condense it and make it more of even a friendlier package. But in totality, I do back and support the package that I brought forward, version 1 and version 2. Denver Fire has also, not because we need it, but because just being good regional partners with them, and as emergency responders have also agreed with taking some of the stuff out of chapters 9 and 10 and reevaluating those in 2018 to try to make it an easier package and not look so large.
And what's being referenced to is version 1, I think was referred to as draft ordinance B in a memorandum from the city attorney's office, and version 2 would be draft ordinance A that was referenced in the city attorney's memorandum there.
Yep. And then there was a draft version C, which says no amendments, but I would like to stress how difficult it really is to have a code such as the fire code, which, when you look in comparison to the building codes and the plumbing code and mechanical codes that had very minimal amendments, the fire code in itself it's an operational book. It's the way that emergency responders react in situations, and this gives us the specifics we need to be operational and to be effective, and the codes are a basic code. So having no amendments would really take away a lot of the authorities and powers that I have as a fire marshal to act as your local control, and for the emergency responders in general. A bigger issue is if we were to adopt any amendments here or there after, the regulatory piece of it would be so difficult, because we'd be going back to a business that had no amendments, and then 6 months later, we'd be trying to track which businesses were under which version of the code, which is extremely problematic and difficult.
And, it may be helpful, I think, to focus on the differences between what we're calling, I apologize, version draft ordinance A and B, perhaps the difference between those two, and highlighting what some of those differences might be helpful for this body. Are those mostly enumerated in the memorandum from the division chief in Denver?
Correct. Yes. Correct. You just want to point out that going into, after the meeting on May 8th, the only issues the chief building official in the building division had were with chapters 9 and 10. So the changes you'll see only are reflected in those chapters because we already had consensus and agreement on the totality of the other amendments. So chapter 9 and 10 are the ones that we removed.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, anything else there before I move on?
Yeah, I was just looking down the list of your permits, and I'm wondering, are you saying that we have all these uses now? Or are you saying that, like, liquefied chlorine, a permit is required to store, use, sell, or transport liquefied? That seems like a general, not an Inglewood-specific issue.
And actually, it's not. The international codes is the very basic of the permits, the operational permits, and really by region, by state, by climate, there's a lot of other permits that people see more regularly. Kent Place out on University is one of the reasons that I feel that one is very important with the indoor pools. And we've had some issues with the way that chemicals are stored indoors, and it's new to the city of Inglewood. We don't have a lot of locations besides the rec center that have indoor pools. So as they're becoming more of a norm in multifamily residences, it's a better idea. It's a better way for me to know what kind of chemicals and hazardous materials are being stored on these residential properties.
I'll listen to others' questions as well.
Thank you. I believe it's Councilmember Russell.
So would it necessarily be a hardship for Inglewood if we adopted draft ordinance B? And you're still recommending that we adopt draft ordinance B rather than draft ordinance A?
You know, I'm at this point, I fully support both. You know, I would say at this point, I would ask for draft ordinance A because it's more of a collaborative effort with our planning and development division and the building department. So until I could, you know, bring them into the 2018 code and have more of a collaborative efforts from day one, just because we had change of staffing with the chief building official, you know, I'm happy to support version A because, you know, that's what the level that she felt most comfortable with, and Denver did as well, and, you know, we can move forward and be effective with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Barentine.
Hi. Back again. And the reason we keep coming back, with all due respect to the Mayor Pro Tem, is because there were very specific things that council people brought up that were concerns, and if those have been addressed, then we need to move forward. If you, as our professional and working on this for 2 years, and now having, it's unfortunate that the building department didn't seem to work, that there wasn't better communication before, but now if you're supporting A, then that's what I would support. So unless, since we keep coming back to this and bringing it up again because people on council had specific issues with specific amendments, if we're not going to, I don't think that this was necessary for you to make a presentation because it's things that we were supposed to have brought up and say this is what we have an issue with so that they could go ahead and know what they should bring forward. That was identified at the last meeting with 9 and 10, and if that's been taken care of, then I think we can move forward with this. Unless there's specific council members have specific problems and specific amendments so that you have something to work with, then unless we're intending to take a year or two going through this, like you already spent a year or two with it. So I don't. If she's recommending A, then that's what I would support to do, unless there are specific issues that can be brought up so that they can work on them. Have another meeting again.
Thank you. There's some support for draft ordinance A. Councilmember Yates.
You were talking about the storage of chlorine and stuff. That's covered with the MDS. Hopefully I'm using the right initials here. There's a lot of regulation that talks about storing if it's in tanks. You know, you chain them down. You have to have the stuff labeled. You have to have your placards and stuff like that. How you know, since you brought that particular one up, how is it different what you want to do versus the norm for the industry and the norm for the country?
It's not a huge difference. Like I said, operational permits in the international code, they have the basics covered by chapter. By individual jurisdictions, you know where your hazards are and where the largest casualties could possibly be. So for me, knowing that the pools are a new thing and we're getting, you know, more 4- and 5-story multifamily residential occupancies. We're getting an assisted living memory care facility that's going to be 6 stories. These are operational concerns as well as a larger possibility of casualties or loss of life or injury. So having these operational permits gives myself, the inspectors, and the emergency responders, it's basic information so that when we're doing inspections, we know that, you know, they have a bulk chlorine permit. So each year we'll be looking at the regulatory pieces specific to that bulk chlorine, because where I would love to say I'm an expert on every single section of this code, every 3 years it changes. So it just makes sure that we're, you know, up to speed on, do we have the right MSDSs, which are the data sheets for the chemicals? Do we have the appropriate signage? Has something changed where there's been lessons learned or fatalities where the quantities need to be separated or ventilated differently? Because it's not a fail-safe code. There are no codes that are fail-safe. So it just keeps us operationally and as inspectors annually making sure that we know where our hazards are, our target hazards, and making sure that we're keeping them up to speed in our record keeping and our documentation.
So if I understand you correctly, what you want to do is you want to have people pull permits so that you know that facility has those substances on site. Now, what's
It'll be on new. This, like I said, this is not a retroactive code, so it's new construction. So when people are submitting for like the memory care facility that's up and coming, or the schools that may have a pool, this will be part of the permit process. It's no additional fees. It's a way that we start this documentation and make sure that we're up to speed and current with the times.
Well, when it comes to the schools and stuff, that's strictly straight 2015 IRC. The state made it very clear that we cannot use any amendments in the schools. So let's talk about other facilities. So don't you guys go around and inspect these facilities periodically? Isn't that part of your responsibilities?
Yes, we do. Annually is what we're shooting for.
Okay. And I know sometimes it's difficult to do it annually, but now when you go in, aren't you keeping track of some of the special situations that you're finding in these places, making note for the facility? You guys are also there to learn about the facility and to know when you come in through X, Y, and Z. Isn't that just standard operating procedure?
In theory, it is, but as we've seen throughout the city of Inglewood, where the construction is booming, if someone doesn't have a change in use, they're not changing the type of occupancy, or have not done any construction, a new owner can move into the same address in a location without us being notified or needing to pull permits. So we might walk in 1 year to business A, and next year go into that same business A, and it's a different owner, and they do store different chemicals, and they have different machinery and different equipment and different ways that they do business. And not every inspector does every business the same every year because we don't have enough staffing. So where Inspector Patel may do it 1 year, I may do it the next year. So there's always going to be those gaps, but if we have that documentation and those records on hand, that's easily shared across many, many different resources.
Now, isn't that more of an administrative function that you guys are
Absolutely,
wanting?
and this is operational permits are administrative.
Yet we're needing to, and you're requesting that we change our ordinances different from all of the other jurisdictions, except for Denver. If we adopt the 300 pages of amendments. So we'd go in line with what Denver does, or are we following what the rest of the world does?
I can't speak to what the rest of the world does. I am looking at some of the same permits that Denver does because they are our emergency responders. So I would like for them to be, the information we're finding and we're sharing is, we're not duplicating efforts. We're sharing the same information that cause the same hazards that they're used to looking for, that we're aware of, so that we're their information because they're not doing inspections. We are as your local control.
So what you're trying to tell me is that you want the changes because that's the way Denver does it.
No, sir.
No. Okay.
No.
Well, then I'm having a hard time here because this is
that is part of it. If Inglewood Fire was sitting here as our fire department, still to this day, I would still be asking for 99% of these same operational permits. I was not here when the 2012 code was brought to before the city of Inglewood. I was not an employee here, so I can't speak to how they did their operational permits historically. All I know from my practice and then the way I do business, knowledge is everything for us. What we don't know is what hurts us.
Now, why are you choosing Denver amendments versus like South Metros or West Metros or Littletons? I mean, they're dealing with a lot of the very same situations that Denver is and that we deal with. And they're managing to do this with a lot less regulation.
Okay, the main reason is because through this IGA 2 years ago, Denver was the jurisdiction that you chose for emergency response. So it makes more sense to me to speak to Denver and look and see how they do business and what they do operationally than to pick Parker or Aurora. I mean, it seemed to be the right fit after what the city of Inglewood chose.
Now, when we made that decision, it was a decision based upon we wanted to keep our fire marshal because we wanted to keep our own local control. We wanted to be able to not be over-regulated. So we decided that Denver had the best package for providing personnel and equipment, but we kept your position to help keep from having this deluge of additional regulations and paperwork and everything, and keep Inglewood instead of turning into Denver.
And I would just like to point out that this is not regulatory. As I said, this is administrative. This is work that my office is going to do and the inspectors are going to do. We're bringing this burden onto ourselves because we feel it's important. We feel it keeps people safe. It keeps emergency responders safe, the citizens, you guys safe. So we're bringing this burden onto ourselves and creating the work for us because we believe in it, and it's not creating regulation. It's just information.
Well, I mean, it does create regulation because we're going to be asking our residents, our customers, to fill out additional paperwork. And by the way, if you don't do this, you can be fined for it, or you're going to be summoned if you don't. Where in other jurisdictions, they aren't with the same type of requirements and penalties and stuff. So it is more regulation. They're expected to follow through and make sure that they understand what permits that they need and that they apply for them. So
Gates, I think we're starting to debate some policy here.
Okay.
Are you suggesting that you're in favor of draft ordinance C, which I believe is coming forward on second reading tonight? Is that right? Anyway, the unamended.
I would be in favor of an amendment, although there is some amendments that I would agree with. I would agree with the amendments for the marijuana. Those facilities have all sorts of very dangerous types of situations. And when these guys go in or the police department goes in, they need to know. So I would be in favor of that.
Would you support draft ordinance A?
Would I?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful to understand. Mayor Pro Tem?
I think all along I've been willing to support just a naked, 2015 IFC and just have discussion on why, because I'm just looking through here and I'm just like, why are all these here? There's so many that you say you spent 2 years on them. I kind of it just gets the feeling that it was just easy to do what Denver's doing, so let's just do that instead of really looking at what we want to do as our own city. That's just my personal view on that. Not saying that that's what you did. It just seems like, the reason I'm going to echo what Mr. Yates said, the reason we wanted our own so we could keep local jurisdiction. This amendment process gives it totally away. And to say it doesn't burden anybody but you is, it's not true, because every person that comes to Inglewood to want to build or do something, if they see that these are very onerous and they see that Littleton, they can build the same thing but not have to go through all the regulation, it might be less attractive for them to do it here versus somewhere else. So that's important to me. Not that we're doing anything unsafe or, the safety issues. I'm okay with some parts of it. I'm okay with the 9 and 10 changes, but I'm just not okay with all of it. And I don't know how to get that satisfied for me, in one sitting, other than saying, let's do the 2015. It sets our base code, and then we can change it from there. So I would be in favor of C, just moving forward, so that this council, who made it so clear and made sure that change that was so important to us at the time to keep our independence from this, that we still have that. And yet, listen to you and to your assistant and to our building and our buildings, whatever they're called, the building people, and say what really means something. I haven't heard from staff either way of whether wow, this is a great idea. No, this is. I'm not sure where we're at on this. So I'm going to support C, just because it just seems over onerous, and it seems like we did it simple by just importing what Denver's already done, because there are fire people, but yet, we made the decision to keep it. And if that's what council wants to do, is give up that control, then they're welcome, they're welcome to do that, but I'm not at this time, so that's all I have.
Thank you. I'm hearing a couple folks suggesting support for Draft Ordinance C, again, the Fire Code 2015, without any amendments. I guess my question would be, is there something in Draft Ordinance A that you find offensive, or are those issues contained within Draft Ordinance A in which our building official has sort of signed off on?
I can accept some of the changes in A. I just can't accept all of them.
Okay.
I just don't know if they're all necessary or they're just thrown in because Denver threw them in.
Thank you. Apologize. I don't know who was first. Councilmember Russell? Councilmember Barentine. Thank you.
One correction for the Mayor Pro Tem. It wasn't this council that went ahead and did the change over to the fire. It was the previous council.
Correcting me.
It was this council, however, that made the decision to go ahead and put the fire marshals on in those positions and expand that. And I think that everything that's presented in the 3 times now that we've had it has shown that there was a lot of thought and work and collaboration that went into this. And if Littleton has 3 different fire entities with it, and so I'm not sure if the blanket statement of everybody else does it a certain way is fair or even pertinent. I agree. If we wanted to have local control, we should have kept our fire department. I think that then we would be working with them doing business in here and not having this kind of being thrown out there as if all of a sudden making the decision to go with the Denver Fire Department for service is a good idea, and then working collaboratively with them on the codes is somehow acquiescing our local control is ridiculous. I believe you're correct. If we still had our own fire department, we'd be working with them and their issues and what's going on there too. At no time have I felt that you willy-nilly took something because it was easy or because Denver did it. I think you've made it very clear that you've worked with the building department and the community development department, all of the departments here, as what's in this memo, and the previous 3 times you've come. And what we asked, what you were told, was that there were certain amendments that there were problems with, and now we're just like, well, there's a lot of them. We've got some problems with some of them, and we're still not going to adopt any of them. When you ask specifically, and I thought we were going to go ahead and provide them with the ordinances or amendments that were of a problem so that they could work on it and have the information for us. We've not provided that, and now we still have the same problem, and we're having the same dialogue that we did the previous 2 times. It's a lot, it's overregulation, and without bringing the specifics of what the problems are, concerns, which ones are good and which ones are not, and still accusing you, inappropriately in my opinion, of just wholeheartedly adopting Denver's fire with no thought, with no process. And it's been proved at 3 different meetings now that they had a process and that they've gone, talked to our people. We've had the building people here. We went over the issues that they had. And without anything else being brought up to continue this dialogue seems kind of a waste of time and a kind of a waste of their time and consistently just dissing Denver. Now, I may not have been on council when we went to Denver, but we are with Denver now. And for us to go ahead and just bemoan that piece of it and consistently bring you up here and question your professionalism in doing this, I think is inappropriate.
Mr. Mayor,
So if we don't...
Professionalism. Can we get some order, please?
I don't think she was out of order here.
No,
I'm
I
happy
don't-
to come back
I
to
don't
you to set
either.
the record straight on that issue.
So...
Making accusations that are unfounded. We're trying to be a kinder, gentler.
Yeah.
I don't think this is kind, and I don't think it is gentle to bring somebody back 3 times and still have the same concerns, same questions, without bringing up specifics about what you have a problem with, what amendments are of a concern so that they can go ahead and bring us back more information and either accept the ones that you don't have a problem with and give them an opportunity to address the ones you do. But just to sit there and say now after a 3rd meeting that we're just going to eliminate all of the amendments. We've had the building people here. This is the 3rd time we've gone through this, and I'm still not hearing the specifics on which amendments are good and which ones are not.
Please conclude your comments.
Oh, I still have another 8 minutes if I go ahead with Mr. Yates' time limit. I think that this has gone on long enough, and until we have some specifics on what amendments are a problem so that they can bring us specific information, I don't want to go ahead and take C if there are truly specific amendments that are of a concern and have some legitimate issues that we need to have addressed with this council. If there are not specific amendments, and it is just the overarching feeling that they just adopted Denver without consideration, then I think that that's inappropriate and we should adopt A.
Thank you. Just for the council's benefit, I'll try to reframe this issue here. Again, we are trying to gain consensus on A through C. I am hearing some support for C. I am hearing some support for A. I do think that the process that we've been bringing this forward has been productive. This is a different version than we looked at last time. We now have another option that has been approved by our building department through the diligent efforts of staff. So I'd like to try to refocus our conversation onto which of these we support to try to get us to consensus. I'll go to Councilmember Barentine, then myself, and I'll come back around.
You mean Russell? I actually am very appreciative of the work that has been done and the thought that has gone into this. And I will support draft ordinance A in the fact that Denver Fire and our fire marshal have worked together with our building department and community development and have addressed issues that are pertinent to Inglewood. And I think part of the problem is council does not have time to read the entire fire code, and if they did, they wouldn't understand it. And I am very thankful for the staff that we have, and since we have chosen to go with Denver, I think this is the responsible thing to do, and so I will be supporting A. Thank you.
Thank you. Real quick, before I turn to Councilmember Yates, I'm just going to interject a couple of comments, and that is that I am also supporting A. I'd love to hear from some others who are a little bit worried about that, which you view as the most problematic. I'm open to having that discussion if I feel like there's some negative impact there. But again, knowing that our fire marshal has diligently looked through it and is proposing that, our building department has looked through it and is proposing that, as well as Denver, I feel fairly comfortable that we're on a united front there and in a good, relatively good spot. Councilmember Yates?
Well, if we're truly going to be talking about stakeholders' feelings and desires and wishes, I recently attended a Colorado Fire Prevention Association meeting along with a couple other national fire agencies. And I started talking with some of the reps, and they were saying that when you adopt this quantity of amendments to the code, you really need to get the stakeholders involved. That means the property owners, the business owners, and this whole process takes over a year if we're going to truly do it in the way that it needs to be done, because we can adopt this and it's administrative, but the final burden is on the public. The final burden is one that's going to have to be paying for the permit, having to make sure that they know about these permits and following all of the additional regulations. That's another reason why I'm not in favor of just arbitrarily adopting so many amendments. Many other fire jurisdictions has nowhere close to this quantity of amendments to the fire. But the 2015 is really something that needs to be taken care of fairly soon. It frankly needs to be done now. And amendments are always something that can always come forward at any point in time. And I think that if we're going to be managing our jurisdiction, we need to be understanding these amendments as to why we're doing it, what the code really says, and then why are we making these changes? Is there any evidence to support these changes, or is it just a policy thing that somebody wants to do because they want to do it? And I'm not saying that that's what you're doing, although we're being accused over here by other council members of that. I don't see
Point of order.
I do not see it being.
Cede the floor here for a moment on the point of order here.
It is very frustrating to have certain council members attack other council members when we're sitting here because of a thing that transpired on April 3rd that was totally out of line. And so I really would like those pointing fingers to stop.
You know, I would appreciate it both ways as well.
I would be
know
totally
that-
in favor of it if everybody be professional about this.
Just for future reference, I do feel like, something that is a subjective type of thing, are you being rude, are you doing these things, it puts me in a little bit of a difficult spot to make that sort of subjective call. Obviously, I will, make my own subjective opinion and try to maintain order here moving forward, but let's try to cooperate here and move forward together. Councilmember Yates?
Well, so my point is that let's do 2015. If we're going to truly adopt amendments, we need to get the stakeholders involved. And we need to start having community meetings. That's the way it's done.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Try to keep my time brief since we're being monitored. My whole point of why I prefer to take the amendments on is, Mr. Mayor, you remember when we adopted a fire sprinkler code that turned into holy hell because we didn't look at all the ramifications of that. And then one person did it, and it just cost them $30,000 or however much that was close to that. And then we removed that because we found that we didn't need that. That's my worry with this. I'm going to echo what Councilmember Russell said. We don't know everything about this. So you're asking me to say, I don't know why all of these are here. No one's explained why all these are here. So therefore, I'm going to approve something I don't even know or understand why they're there. So all I'm asking is for clarity and to move forward so that we don't do a mistake that we've made before. So I'm a little cautious because of where we've been before on approving something that turned and bit us in the rear. That's the whole thing. And if you feel that I've attacked you personally, please accept my apologies. My comment about adopting is the original amendments look just like Denver's, so it looks like we just imported them in. So I'm not saying that's what you did, but just saying that that's what it looked like to me. But I'm sure there was a lot of work in this, but the work, I'm going to echo what Mr. Yates said as well. Maybe we need some builders to look to this and say, hey, are you good with this? What impact would it have on you? Or what would it not? If we could just get a little bit more, but let's get the initial set, make sure that we have everybody's input. And if these are all good, I want them all in there then. And if there's some that maybe, whoops, we didn't know that would have the impact like we did with the sprinkler system, then I'd prefer that we do it more safely. That's it.
Thank you. Councilmember Barrington?
The issue with the fire code that we did was I think that cost that homeowner $10,000. And you're right, we need to know what we're doing and when we do amendments. And that was because we didn't even have the fitting sizes to get the kind of water pressure in to even have those kind of sprinklers. Our system, our infrastructure didn't even support that. My concern is that you've, time and time again in your documentation says that you've spent over 2 years on this, and our city manager, I'm sure, has been part of this process to make sure that we had a process going in and that all the departments were talked to. And I'm concerned at this point that we're now changing this and that all of a sudden we're supposed to have some other totally different process for this whole system to put this in, that we're supposed to have some public process or copy somebody else's system on how they did it with their public, concerns me. That we would be starting this then at the recommendation of council members to try and redo this entire thing. We asked for that the very first time. Exactly what the Mayor Pro Tem is asking for was, it looks like you just put it in there because Denver wanted it, and you had all of this documentation that was the backup, and we received that. That was the backup for all of the conversation that you had done in making these amendments go in dealing with all of these departments, and I'm not sure why that was not good enough. If that did not suffice, if that did not answer the questions, because she's already been asked for that and provided it. So if that didn't answer the questions and provide enough process, but to suggest that we have not done some due diligence in this process, I think is unfair to all the staff, including them. If there were specific amendments that people were coming to this table today with, then it would be one thing. That's what's been asked for before. The backup and documentation for the way the decisions were made for the amendments was asked for and provided for before. And so unless there are specific amendments that are a problem and concern, I think at this point in the game, we should be bringing those very specific ones to the table. I don't have any. We had the discussion. They brought the information. She provided the backup for all of what she did before, as she was requested. We had the building people here. We've gotten all of this backup now from all of the players saying that they want A. And now we're having it suggested that somebody else does it differently, so we should change the entire process and start from beginning. And I am not for that.
Thank you. I'll ask a couple quick questions, and I'll turn it back over to Councilmember Yates, and then we'll try to go over to Councilmember Martinez to see if we can get any consensus on this issue. I guess this question is for staff. Through the process, who would be the body that would be looking out for business interest or impact on local private business or private property? Was that part of the building department sort of purview there? And who could speak to that most directly, do you think?
May I speak to that?
Please.
As Mr. Yates did say, every jurisdiction does it different. I've been here at the City of Englewood as your fire marshal for 4 years, so I can't speak directly to how they've performed their past adoption processes. I do know that typically you bring the building code, fire code, mechanical, you open it all up to public comment, to stakeholders, sprinkler companies, fire alarm companies, anybody that may have public comments, and they submit those online. I do not believe the City of Englewood has handled theirs like that previously, but it is something we can definitely, look at in the future. It does usually take over a year to get, chapter by chapter comments looked at. And then specifically Denver, and I did sit through all of these hearings from just before the IGA was put into place, and we knew that Denver may be the direction. They invited myself and previous Chief Building Official Lance Smith to attend, and those hearings were represented by the Homeowners Association, Fire NFPA, Fire Sprinkler, National Sprinkler Association, the schools. They had homeowners associations. They had 13 different panel members across the industry that voted on these amendments. They weren't picked out by Denver and something they thought of over coffee. They were voted on by this committee every Friday, chapter by chapter, amendment by amendment, and they did not make it into amendments if there was not consensus. So it was a very diplomatic process that did expand like 16 months. So it is something we could do in the future if that's what your direction is. But the amendments that I am proposing, they were conducted with stakeholder opinions.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Maybe I'll rephrase as well and try to get a little more information. And that is, who would be the party within our organization who would throw their hands up and say, hey, this is a bit too onerous on business, and that's the grounds under which I would object to the adoption of this or the recommendation of adoption for this, Mr. Keck?
Yeah, that would be the Community Development Department. So that would be Director Power, who, with the building official, the new building official, Karen Montanez, did look this over. And again, I think comments have been raised tonight. There are some negative externalities that maybe no one has foreseen. But for the most part, if the department did look and see where, in fact, things were too onerous, and they did raise the questions as have been raised tonight. Do we have to have a permit for all these types of things for new businesses? And after walking through it with the fire marshal, as you've seen from her memorandum, Karen Montanez's memorandum, she believed that it was feasible to put this code into place with the amendments as it's been proposed.
So I see in the memorandum the building department is recommending adoption of A. Does that mean the community development department is also
correct.
Encouraging adoption of A?
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
There's always constructive tension, obviously, between economic development, who really wants to bring in new business, as well as the regulators who are planning and building folks, who obviously are looking out for life safety, as well as what the fire marshal looks out for life safety too. But in many instances, they had to get together to find what life safety really meant, because they're coming from two different angles. One of them is the built environment, and one of them is for those who respond to the built environment.
Thank you. I don't believe this decision requires a public hearing from the city council. However, as we all are aware, we could implement, I think, a public hearing on something like this if we were worried and wanted to hear from additional stakeholders. Councilmember Yates.
By no means am I saying that staff has not done their due diligence. The stakeholders in the community, I'm not totally sure that they have been informed, or do they know the consequences. Now, I did not go through A to see if there's a thing in there that would limit who is licensed by the state in order to do this type of work would be coming into our community. Denver has some regulations that goes up and beyond the state requirements for fire licensing. And one thing that I'm always in favor of is trying to keep this ground, keep our playing field level. And if we've got regs in here that we got to adopt Denver standards in order to have contractors in our city, we're going to be cutting a lot of people out of this community, because there's a lot of fire contractors and alarm contractors that will not do business in Denver, not because they can't pass the standards, because they just don't want to deal with Denver. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is because I was accused earlier, because I was bringing up my knowledge in this field and saying that I was manipulating things. So, and then I was just said that we're not bringing up specific information. So, we need to get the stakeholders involved. That means the fire contractors, that means monitoring services, that means the people who own the buildings, the people who are going to ultimately pay the price for our actions today.
You think a public hearing would be adequate to address some of them?
No, no, because this is not, as you can see, this is not a simple subject. There's a lot of nuances, and
May I answer one of your questions for you? The undue hardship for contractors and being licensed. The city of Inglewood currently requires contractor licenses. It does not change the requirement. We actually did make it easier that if you're licensed in Denver, we'll accept that. Or if you're licensed in Inglewood and you're doing work on Denver, that we'd accept them both ways to make it, you're not doubling up and having two different. So we actually made that easier for them.
So
just to answer that question.
You would accept the state license and then have us fill out the $50 fee just to be registered in the city?
No, if you have that license and you bring it in to show that you're licensed with Denver, we accept that.
With the state. Because that's where all the fire contractors are licensed with.
Yes.
Is the state,
but even,
number one.
Well, the city of Inglewood, to this day, even if you're licensed with the state, because you have to be to work on fire sprinkler systems, it's mandated by the state.
Right.
Yes, and we require that individually with the city of Inglewood. Additionally, that's just not Denver. We do that now, and we have.
Okay. So, as a contractor, the person comes in, he's got a state license, he has to fill out a license for Inglewood. Is it just administrative, or are you saying that then they need to pass Denver's licensing requirements?
No,
or
the
what?
city of Inglewood, and the city attorney may be able to speak to this as well, is the reason we have individual contractor licensing for the city of Inglewood is a liability. Just because they're under the umbrella of the state doesn't mean that individually as a jurisdiction that our insurance would cover them doing work if we didn't do our diligence and have a minimum requirement for them to be licensed in our city. So I do know that is a legal piece, and liability is a big reason we have those contractor licenses in each jurisdiction.
Well, as long as, frankly, there is other cities that require you to do a license within their jurisdiction. Not a lot of them, but there are others, and it's simply just fill out some paperwork, pay $50, you're done.
I'd like to try to move us along. Anything else,
Yeah,
Councilmember Yates?
lots
We've
of
only got a
ways.
couple minutes left here in this session.
I lost my thought. Whatever. Currently, I'm not in favor of A or B. C is what's it. I think if we're going to adopt, especially this quantity, we need to be having community meetings with the stakeholders. That's the contractors, that's the building owners, that's insurance companies, that's everybody. Because this is substantial. It is substantial. And it's not an easy, here's my thought. It's not an easy thing to understand. I've been doing fire for 8 years here, and I'm learning stuff all the time. There's little nuances of understanding why you do something in order to keep this result. I would be totally in favor of having heat detectors in attics because I've had 5 of my customers have fires, only 4 of them sprinkler systems would have put them out because there's no sprinklers in the attic. And the heat detectors would have gotten the fire guys out there a lot quicker, and it's a cheap solution.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem. Very briefly, as I would like to go to Councilmember Martinez to get any shot at...
This will be very brief. I could support A as long as we somehow make sure that our stakeholders are aware and that we have a period of time where we can say, we're going to adopt A by this date. If anybody is not, if there's any hardships, can you bring them before this date?
In my mind, that's what a notice of public hearing does.
Okay. However we want to do that, I can support A if we move that direction. And if we put this out there and the builders don't come and respond, then we adopt A.
Councilmember Martinez.
Yeah, thank you for all your hard work on this. It really shows that you've put in a lot of hard work and effort. And I support Ordinance A because 2 reasons. One, the whole reason that we're even talking about this is the safety of our community, and that's the most important thing we could even talk about up here, and decisions that we can make on council. I think this is the safest version, being that you collaborated with all of the appropriate departments. They all have buy-in. I think that is really important. So for those reasons, I will be supporting A. And maybe perhaps if we want some more public input on this process next time, maybe we dictate now that in next code update go around, we involve, residents and businesses to get their feedback during this process.
What do you think about a public hearing?
I would be fine with that.
Yeah. How do you guys feel about a public hearing?
I don't think it's necessary, only because they said that there were amendments were changeable if somebody has a problem with it. I mean, I don't have a problem specifically with the public hearing. It's not normal for this process, and I kind of don't want to set that kind of precedent. But if that will help ease this going on 3 years worth of work. But we were told that the amendments are changeable too, that if there's a problem with something and we see some unintended consequence, that we can always change one of the amendments. And since no specific amendment has been brought up by this body to be discussed, then I'm not sure how that public hearing would help it. If you want to do that,
I guess
that
my
would be
thought
fine.
is just it would give that notice post and would give that, any opportunity for any identified issues to come back. I feel like if we adopt it and we don't, there's just no process for that. Don't get me wrong. I would hope that if there was a major problem, either city staff
I don't
or
have
an
objection to the public hearing. I wasn't stating that. I just am concerned about.
I'm kind of hearing now that maybe we have general support for option A. It is correct. Yes, option A, and with a public hearing. Does anybody have a major allergic reaction to a public hearing on this issue?
I think that stakeholders need more than a hearing on this.
But at least a hearing would give them something in my mind.
Well, a hearing would be just, here you go. What do you think? Where if we have if we really do this the way it needs to be done, you're going through, as Laura says, you're going through each of these items with the stakeholders, and they're saying, yeah, no.
Councilmember Yates, I think we already have consensus to bring forward A. I think the question now is A going to come forward with or without a public hearing? Which is your preference?
I still say it needs to be stakeholders need to be involved with these.
I'm going to suggest we have consensus on a public hearing. Any thoughts on this, City Attorney, as far as public hearing when it's not required? Do you have any best practice or anything? Any thoughts on that at all, or is it really truly what the council wants to do?
It really truly is what the council wants to do, and it's not a problem for us to set that up.
I think it would be a good idea. I think if there is a major objection, we can identify it before we pass it through a public hearing. Any final comments on this issue before we adjourn? Seeing none, thank you, everybody. We'll pick this up next door.